Hey guys, welcome back to Alienation, or if you are new here, welcome. My name is Megan, and every Sunday I sit down and talk about some form of weird and maybe not so wonderful topic that interests me. And today we have another true crime case. No surprise there. However, want to apologise in advance. So I honestly didn't think I would be able to film this week. I have been so busy. This has been a constant mental battle this week between deciding on, can I fit an episode in this week, or am I going to have to skip a week, which I really didn't want to do. So please don't hate me, but this is going to be a part one of 2 parts. I'm so sorry. If you're like me, I hate when I have to wait for the second part, but it's the only way I was going to be able to upload this week. So instead of uploading either a really shitty episode or instead of uploading an episode that was just rushed and the effort wasn't there, I wanted to actually put the effort in, do this case some justice. And this is kind of the only way that I can do it. So I'm so sorry. This is going to be part 1 of this case, and part 2 will be coming next week. But anyway, today I am going to be talking about the Menendez Brothers. This is a very infamous case. I'm presuming if you are watching true crime videos, you already know about this case. Not many people don't. This got so much publicity. It was very widely talked about. It was broadcasted all over the news. People were able to see the case and the trial. So there is a lot to this case. So another reason why I'm going to be doing it in 2 parts. So I've got myself a big ass caramel latte and I am ready to talk about this case, because this case is very interesting. I thought I knew everything I needed to know to form an opinion about this case, and I did have a specific opinion about this case. However, after researching it, my opinion started to change quite a bit. I'm still unsure as to how I feel about this case, but I do have more of a different opinion as to before I started this research. So let's just get into it before I waffle on too much. But today's video does, as always, contain some intense topics and some triggering subjects. So here's my little disclaimer here. Warning, today's episode contains topics and descriptions that some audience members may find disturbing. So viewer and listener discretion is advised. So like I said, we are going to be talking about the Menendez brothers. But before we talk about the bros, we are going to talk about good old mum and dad and some of their history and their background. I just like to give this sort of information in a case. It helps give you a little idea of what's gone on. One of the sort of main people in this case is Jose Enrique Menendez. It's a little bit of a mouthful. And he is the father in this case. He was born on May the 6th, 1944 in Havana in Cuba. And he was kind of blessed. He was born into quite a wealthy and successful family. Their dad was a well-known soccer player who even had his own accounting firm, so he kind of had a lot of money. And his mum was a swimmer, and she was so good she was even elected to Cuba's Sports Hall of Fame. So they were doing quite well, this family. They might not have been elite athletes, but they were celebrity athletes. So they were kind of in the limelight. They were very well known. They had a lot of money, and the kids pretty much had everything they wanted. Jose actually had 2 sisters, and these 2 sisters had everything that they wanted and needed. And unfortunately, as Jose was the only boy in the family, he had a lot of pressure put on him to succeed. He has very competitive, athletic parents, so they're gonna put pressures on him. And I'm pretty sure that Jose also went into swimming like his parents. But anyway, in 1959, is it Fidel Castro? Again, I'm sorry for my sucky pronunciations. He overthrew the ruling government and he began seizing properties of all the wealthy people, all the upper class people, and obviously with Jose's family being pretty much celebrities, they were targeted by this guy. So in 1960, Jose was 16 years old and him and his family had to flee to America. So they left Cuba, they headed to the States, and they pretty much planned on living this American dream. So when Jose was in high school, he was a very high achiever. He was a brilliant student. He did very well in all of his grades. And he even won an athletic scholarship. So like I said, he had very athletic parents. He too was pushed in sports. But unfortunately, he couldn't afford to attend an Ivy League college, which sucks because that's exactly what he wanted to do. He wanted to go to an Ivy League school, but he couldn't afford it. Like I said in last week's case, the American schooling system is very expensive. And even though his parents might have been rich, they had to flee to America, they probably couldn't help him in this dream. So instead, he went to the Southern Illinois University in Carbondale. However, this wasn't too bad because he ended up meeting his future wife there. Her name was Mary Louise Anderson, but her friends and everyone sort of knew her as Kitty, so I will be referring to her as Kitty in this case. So a little bit of information about Kitty. She was born on October 14th, 1941 in Oak Lawn, Illinois. So this makes her a few years older than Jose, not by much, but she was slightly older. Her background was a little bit different from Jose, so she came from a middle-class working family. Her father owned an air conditioning business, and unfortunately, he was not a nice guy. He was cruel, he was very, very abusive, and Kitty's home life was very unhappy. Her mother obviously had to live through this abuse, so she was extremely disheartened all the time, very depressed, and she was just a battered, downbeat woman. But when Kitty was younger, her father actually abandoned the family. He seems like a really great guy, doesn't he? And he left and moved in with a mistress, so he left Kitty and her mum. I'm not sure if she had any siblings, but either way, her father walked out, and Kitty turned into a very bitter and moody child. And she didn't have many friends growing up, but eventually Kitty had had enough. She'd grown to despise her father, so she cut off all ties with him and carried on with her life. So she also attended Southern Illinois University or college. This is obviously where she met Jose, and they hit it off right away, but no surprise, both their families did not approve of their relationship at all. Kitty's family didn't approve of Jose in the slightest because of his Cuban heritage, and Jose's family didn't approve of Kitty because she had divorced parents, so neither of them approved of the relationship. But regardless of that, they still got married, and they tied the knot in 1964. And Jose graduated from college, and he became a very, 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 very successful businessman. So he's had these parents pushing him his whole life. He really had it drilled into him that he had to do well, he had to succeed, and he did. And during the early years of their marriage, Kitty was actually a primary school teacher or elementary school teacher. Either way, she taught younger years. And on January the 10th, 1968, they welcomed their first son into the world. So they called him Joseph Lyle Menendez. However, he did only go by Lyle. So again, I will be referring to him as Lyle in this case. And he was born in New York City, but he actually grew up outside of Princeton in New Jersey. And Jose, I'll talk a little bit more about his character in a short while, but he basically said to Kitty, look, I'm going to go out and earn all the money. Why don't you stay home? Why don't you stay home and look after our son? You look after the house, do all the housework, just be a nice, happy housewife, and I'll go out and earn all the money. I get that was quite a common thing to do back then, but at the same time, if things go wrong, Kitty has nothing to rely on. But Kitty agreed. She was like, why not? I'm happy to do that. She actually wanted to be an actress, and she gave all that up and was like, okay, I'll stay at home. That's fine. But anyway, on November the 27th, 1970, they welcomed their second son into the world, and they named him Eric. And Eric was born in Blackwood in New Jersey. So like I said, the boys grew up just outside of Princeton in New Jersey. I think specifically it was Hopewell Township in Mercer County, if that means anything to you. But they attended Princeton Day School. And their family had a lot of money, so the two were pretty spoiled little boys, but they weren't necessarily troublemakers while they were growing up. They were just two kind of normal, spoiled little rich kids like you would expect. So where was all this money coming from? Like I said, Jose became a very successful businessman. He had a lot of different career paths that weirdly linked together, and he was smashing every single one of them. So in 1986, Jose's career actually took them to Beverly Hills, California. So the entire family picks up their roots and they moved there. And here he was the corporate executive for RCA. However, the year after, so in 1987, he began working at Live Entertainment, which is a big ass company. It's known as Artisan Entertainment Incorporated today, and it's produced films like The Blair Witch Project, so it's a pretty big company. I've just double checked my notes, and apparently the RCA is a music company, so while he was there, he was a music producer and a very successful one at that, and he used all of his Hollywood contacts to bring success with the newly formed Live Entertainment. So he was kind of taking his skills from each career he had and using that to improve in the next one, and he seemed to be very good at what he did. And by 1988, profits for that company had actually reached $16 million, so he was clearly doing something right. Even though he was very good at his jobs, he was wildly disliked by the people he worked with. He was known to be very, very arrogant, very rude, was very derogatory towards his colleagues, and he was basically just an overall asshat. So he would put a lot of pressure on people who worked with him. He would go out of his way to make sure he got what he wanted, and he was very intimidating. So he usually got what he wanted, hence why he was doing so well in his job. However, his home life was very interesting. He, similar to the people he worked with, was very stern. He was very demanding. He was intimidating. If he wanted something, he got it. And he set very, very high hopes for his sons. They were on very strict routines. He controlled everything they did. He was determined to get these boys to be perfect, to be successful, and to keep up this appearance of having a very successful, powerful family. So unsurprisingly, Jose, like I said, is a bit of an asshat, so he starts having affairs. Why can't guys keep in their trousers? He had a string of mistresses and affairs throughout his entire life, and Kitty stayed with him. She knew about this. So like I mentioned, Jose was putting a lot of pressure on his sons. They were young at this time, and he was already forcing them to do a huge bunch of sports, forcing them to perform very, very well academically. And the boys were actually doing pretty well. They were both succeeding in tennis. They both were very talented athletes, and tennis seemed to be their sport. However, education-wise, not so great. They weren't necessarily bad students, but they weren't great. And I even found in my research that apparently Kitty and Jose would sometimes do their homework for them because they constantly wanted them to seem like they were doing well in school or doing well in all the aspects of their life. Guys, I understand you want to help your children. That is not the right way to do it. It's not. So anyway, on the outside, it looked like they were living this perfect American dream. They looked like the idealistic family, this happy, successful, wealthy, rich family. And that is all Jose and Kitty seem to care about. Jose more than Kitty. So it's really not a healthy environment to be bringing the children up in. To the public eye, Kitty was very intelligent. She was very attractive. I'm pretty sure she used to be a pageant queen in the past. She was very charming in public. And she just appeared to be this very ideal lady. She was the perfect wife, the perfect mother. However, we know behind the scenes and from closed doors, that's just not the case. But in reality, Kitty was very high-strung and she could not deal with stress at all. I mean, same girl, same. She was really, really struggling behind the scenes, and her husband's affairs were really, really affecting her. I mean, they would anyone. And unfortunately, his behaviour actually drove her to the edge, and she began acting a little bit irresponsibly. So she began drinking quite heavily, and she even started taking prescription pills. A lot of people did worry and did start to think that she was becoming quite dependent on these pills and alcohol and all these other vices. And sadly, in 1987, Kitty did attempt suicide. She took a bottle of sleeping pills and decided she'd had enough. Luckily, it didn't work, and she was able to recover from this. And it is noted that she was seeing a psychiatrist to help her get through this. So jumping back to the boys, like we said, they're very, very rich, they're very spoiled, and they pretty much had everything that they ever wanted if Jose approved of it. So Eric at the time was at Beverly Hills High School. He got very average grades. I think he sort of averaged out at like a B, which is not bad. He just had a remarkable talent for tennis. He was very, very talented. And picture how big the States is. Eric was actually ranked 44th in the United States for 18 and unders. So he was pretty damn good. Lyle, on the other hand, had actually enrolled at Princeton University. So Princeton is a very prestigious, is it an Ivy League university? I know it's a good one, but I'm not too sure. But I think it's an Ivy League school, which is Jose's dream. He was living out his dream through his son. And while their education was ongoing, Jose kept them on a very, very strict schedule. He controlled everything, even down to the friends that they had. So like I said, the boys weren't the best students, but Lyle had managed to get into Princeton. But how did he pull that off? It is not an easy school to get into. Turns out Lyle didn't meet the requirements to get into that school, which isn't surprising. So obviously, Daddy paid them off. Jose paid the school a huge donation, we'll say, basically bribed them to let him in. And because Lyle wasn't the smartest of kids, he struggled. He couldn't keep up with the curriculum, he couldn't keep up with the demand for work. So at this point as well, the boys had started to rebel slightly against their parents. They were spoiled little kids and they'd been taught to always demand what they wanted. So they were starting to rebel against their parents, disrespect them, not listen to them, and they began to grow quite distant from their parents. So during Lyle's freshman year at Princeton, he was actually placed on academic probation because his grades were so low and his attendance was that poor. And he even then ended up getting suspended for a whole year after being accused of plagiarism. I mean, he's clearly not going to be able to keep up with the curriculum there, so he's going to resort to what he knows best, and that is to cheat. So his dad was pissed. I mean, pissed. He'd managed to get Lyle into the school, and Lyle wasn't performing to the standard he was expecting. He was only suspended for the year, and he was allowed to go back the year after, though. And while he was at school, both Lyle and Eric ended up falling in with the wrong crowd. It's very easy to do when you're a teenager. Peer pressure is a big thing. And they were surrounded by very rich, bored, spoiled, troublemaking teenagers. And they fell in with this crowd, and they resorted to some interesting crimes to help fuel their fire and cure their boredom, pretty much. So for a bit of fun, this crowd, along with the boys, started robbing houses. Bearing in mind, these are kids who are very rich. They don't need this stuff, so they're only doing it for the thrill of it and to do it as sort of a rebel against their lifestyle or their strict parents. Lyle was dating a whole bunch of girls. Obviously, his dad didn't approve of any single one of them. They were kind of just living their best life and doing everything they could to piss their parents off. So while they were doing all this burglary, fortunately, Eric actually got nabbed twice for this. So he was caught and he got arrested. I'm pretty sure he was caught with damning evidence against both him and Lyle. So either way, they were both sort of caught for it. Jose, instead of parenting his children, letting them learn from their lesson, he hired a very high-profile criminal defense attorney to sort it out. Just paid people off, just brushed it under the rug. Once again, he used his wealth and his money to just cover these sort of bad behaviours up. He ended up sorting out a deal for Eric. I think he got probation. I think he had to do some form of community service. But the agreement was that both the boys would end up seeing a counsellor. And that counsellor was Dr. Jerome Azil. He is quite a crucial part of this case. We'll get into that later. Anyway, how did his dad feel about this? He was pissed that they got caught. He was angry that they got caught for stealing other people's belongings. Again, where is the parenting logic in this? Jose then went round to all of the places that they'd stolen from and he paid each of the people back. Again, not really teaching the kids right from wrong. So the boys carried on rebelling against their parents and their relationships began to be very, very rocky. They had a terrible relationship and barely ever spoke. And obviously Kitty and Jose had had enough of this. They were used to getting what they wanted and they weren't able to control their own kids. So they threatened to cut the boys out of their will, which to two young, very spoiled rich boys would have been a shock. That wouldn't have gone down well at all. I know eventually they were cut from the will. I'm not sure at what point in this case, but they were actually cut from this will because they'd had enough. They were like, we're cutting you off. See you later. And on 19th of July, 1989, Kitty actually told her therapist that her sons were, quote, narcissistic, lacked conscience, and exhibited signs that they were sociopaths, unquote. I mean, it's not always the parents' fault, but you raised them. However, jumping ahead to Saturday the 19th of August, Kitty and Jose tried whatever they could to bring the family together, and he suggested that they were to go on a fishing trip. So Jose said, I'll hire a boat and we'll go shark fishing together, and hopefully this will ease some of the tension, get everyone's emotions calm and everything, and hopefully rekindle the family back together. So they did. They went on this boat ride that was apparently going to miraculously save the family. And a lot of the crew did know that the family just seemed miserable, that there was no communication going on. They were all sort of at different parts of the boat doing their own thing. And it was kind of just an awkward boat journey. So Jose was fishing from the back of the boat. Kitty was down below deck because she was feeling seasick. And the brothers were keeping to themselves at the front of the boat, just sort of whispering to themselves. So overall, really happy family boat ride. So now we get to the dreaded date, Sunday the 20th of August, 1989. And this, unfortunately, will be a night to remember. So Josie and Kitty were actually in a family room. They were just chilling. They were watching a film. They were chilling in their lovely, extensive Beverly Hills mansion. This was a very prestigious place. I'm pretty sure people like Elton John and Prince lived on the same road or in the same housing complex as them at some point. But this is 722 Elm Drive. They were eating ice cream and strawberries, just having a chill. So the two boys, Eric and Lyle, were out doing their own thing. So Eric was 21 at this time and Eric was only 17. And they chose to go to the cinema to watch the new James Bond film, but it was sold out. So instead they decided to get tickets for Batman, and then they headed out to meet a friend at a food festival. But on the way there, they ended up getting lost and they missed the friend and they couldn't find the friend. So they had to re-phone this friend up and basically say, we will meet you at the Cheesecake Factory. We'll have some drinks there and have a chill. But Eric being only 17 at the time, was he 17 or was he 19? I should really have fact checked that. But either way, he was underage and couldn't drink. So the boys needed to head back home to grab his fake ID. But around 11:47 p.m, the boys arrived home. And there was actually a witness to this. It was a young teenage girl who lived in one of the houses down the road from the family. And she was outside waiting for a boyfriend to come and pick her up. And she witnessed a car pull up outside the Menendez home. And she saw two men getting out. She said they went to the boot of the car and then they went into the house. So at this time, Lyle called 911 and it is a hysterical phone call. It is quite hard to understand. It's not the clearest of phone calls. I will include it in a second, but clearly something has gone down.
Beverly Hills emergency.
Yes, police.
What's the problem?
Sounds,
What's the problem? What's the problem?
someone killed my parents.
Pardon me?
Someone killed my parents.
What? Who? Are they still there?
Yes.
shot who?
I don't do anything. I just came home.
You came home and found who shot?
I'm mom and dad.
You're in bed?
No, they're still in the house, the people that did the shooting.
Get away from me.
Okay. Hey, let me talk to Eric. Who is the person that was shot?
My mom and my dad.
Your mom and dad?
My mom and my dad.
Okay, hold on a second. Okay, we're on our way over there with an ambulance.
Okay, I gotta go.
Okay. Hello, this is police department.
Yes.
Okay, I want you to come outside. Okay, just come out the front door and
Give it to my brother.
you tell your brother, everybody that's come outside.
Okay.
So as you've just heard, Lyle is a mess. He is screaming and crying. You can also hear Eric in the background screaming and crying. They walked home to find their parents brutally murdered in their own home. And this was a horrific crime scene. It must have been, I hate to use this word, I don't mean it in a disrespectful way, but it must have been disgusting. It must have been an entire bloody mess. But I just want to say, before I move on, as you just heard from that 911 phone call, the person on the phone receiving that call, is it just me or was that a very unprofessional way to deal with this situation? I don't know if it was her first night on the job or if she was training or if that's just how people who answer these calls react, but I'm pretty sure that was very wrong. That's not how you're supposed to deal with these situations. I was under the impression that they had to be pretty stern and firm with the person on the phone because they need to get that information and get whatever service to the scene ASAP. So whether that be fire department, police department, or an ambulance. But at the same time, they have to be very calm because you don't want to escalate the situation. You don't want to make things worse. You don't want to stress out whoever's on the phone. However, this lady's she's like, oh my God, what? Who? Was he shot? Oh my God. That's just a little side note, but I'm pretty sure that's not how you're supposed to handle these things. So the Beverly Hills police officers, Michael Butkus and John Zarnocki, why can't I read these words? They arrived at the Menendez home, so they arrived at this crime scene. It turns out Jose, first of all, was shot at twice. The first shot shattered the glass door that was behind him, and he was hit twice in the right arm and the left elbow, which effectively kept him sat down, so he was still where he was. And then the second was a contact shot to the back of his head. The gun used in this crime was a Mossberg 12-gauge shotgun. If you know how shotguns work, it's going to be a messy scene. So he was shot in the head, and this pretty much blew open his entire skull and killed him. So his body slumped forward. He fell forward because obviously he was gone. And obviously as this happened, Kitty jumped up, she jumped to her feet because this obviously surprised her, and she tried to make a run for it, but these intruders shot her in her right arm and her right calf. Again, if you are shot with a shotgun, it's not going to be pretty. So as she tried to sort of get herself together and carry on running, with the amount of blood that was pooling down her leg, she ended up slipping on her own blood. And then at this point, she was shot again. She got hit in her right arm, her left breast, and this specific bullet pierced her lung, and she got shot in her left thigh. I'm pretty sure that left thigh shot was so close, it was another close range shot, that it actually broke her leg. It just shattered the bone. But miraculously, she wasn't dead yet. She had survived this, and she tried to crawl away. So while she was crawling away, the intruders had actually left. I will talk about why later on in the case, but the intruders did return and shot her again. It was another contact shot, this time to her left cheek. So she was shot in the face with a shotgun. Once again, it completely shattered her skull. There were so many shots involved in this, it was unreal. In the end, she'd been shot 4 times in her head, 10 times in her body, and one of these shots had actually completely severed her thumb on her right hand. I'm waving around my left, this is my right. And unfortunately, as a parting gesture, they were both kneecapped, which basically means they were both shot in the knees. I'm pretty sure they were both shot in their left knee, but I could be completely wrong. And the intruders then actually picked up the shell casings from the scene. So they didn't necessarily try to clean up the scene because it would have just been a mess, but they did actually go around and pick up all the spent shell casings. So picture the absolute state of this crime scene. It was noted that there was brain matter, blood everywhere. It was not a very nice crime scene for the boys to apparently walk in on and find. I get they didn't have a close relationship with their parents, but that would not be a nice crime scene to find. The detective Les Zola, I'm so sorry, was put in charge of this crime scene. He was the head of the investigation, and he noted that nothing had been stolen from the mansion. Nothing appeared out of sorts or out of place, obviously apart from the room where the crime scene was. So instantly it appeared that the victims knew the attacker, because the house showed no sign of forced entry, so the attackers must have known Kitty and Jose enough to be able to enter the home. The boys were just inconsolable. They were screaming. One of them was banging their hand and their head on the floor. They were just losing their mind. All they ever knew was money and their parents. That's all they ever knew, and their parents were now gone. But it is routine procedure to take the boys in for questioning. They are kind of witnesses. They found the bodies, so everyone headed down to the police station. At this time, they weren't considered suspects because of the lack of evidence and obviously how they were acting and all that, so no gunshot residue tests were taken, which pretty bad police work. I don't want to judge how people handle a case, but regardless, they should have been gunshot residue tested, just saying. So the police detective supervisor, Sergeant Thomas Edmonds, conducted the questioning, and it only lasted about 20 minutes, which is a crazily short amount of time for a case like this. But they had to actually bring it to an end due to Eric's inconsolable crying. Like I said, the boys were an absolute mess, and they pretty much couldn't get anything out of them that was going to be useful. But during the questioning, Lyle was quite calm. He did answer some of the questions, but Eric was just distraught and couldn't sit through it, so they ended it after 20 minutes. Very interesting. So I'm just going to very quickly run through the boys' version of events. So this is kind of their alibi. This is what they said happened that day leading up to finding their parents' body, just so the police had some form of routine or structure to that day. So in the morning, they ended up having a late breakfast. Then they played at tennis on the court in their garden. Obviously, they had a tennis court in their garden. They had way too much money. Then they went inside to watch part of a tennis match on TV. Then they spent the afternoon shopping. So they went to the Beverly Center, which is like a local shopping mall for those guys. And then they returned home. And then around 5 p.m., they made plans with that friend that I mentioned. That friend was Perry Berman. And they planned to meet up with him a little bit later at a local food festival. I think it was called Taste of LA or something like that. And that was in Santa Monica. The brothers left home again at around 8 p.m. because they were planning on seeing the new James Bond film, like I mentioned. So they were heading down to the Westwood Village Cinema. But the queues were too long. They think it was going to be sold out. So they went to the Center City Mall to see the 1989 Batman film instead. And then obviously I've mentioned the events after that, and that all pretty much led to them finding the bodies of their parents. So in the next following days and following weeks, a lot of interesting events went down. Obviously, the police wanted to get on with their job and try and figure out what the hell happened, because at the time, I'm pretty sure the area of Beverly Hills only had maybe like 2 crimes a year or 2 murders a year or something. It kind of shocked that community. It was a big thing to happen in that community, and Jose and Kitty were very well known. They were a very rich family. It was a huge thing to happen. So around the same year, 1989, on the 23rd of August, this was 3 days after Jose and Kitty were killed, Dr. Erwin Golden was the medical examiner on this case, and he worked at the Los Angeles County Coroner's Office. Wow, that's a mouthful. And he conducted the autopsies on both Jose and Kitty. And a couple of days after that, on the 25th of August, Lyle and Eric held a memorial service for their parents. They held this at the Directors Guild of America. This is also in LA. However, the boys arrived an hour late to their own parents' memorial, which is interesting. They are young. One of them is still a child, pretty much, but either way, they arrived late, so take from that what you want. And again, Eric was very uncomfortable. He seemed a little bit out of sorts, while Lyle was very calm and very controlled throughout the entire thing. So again, a few days after that, we are now on the 28th of August, the boys decided to hold a very traditional church funeral for their parents. So this was held at the University Chapel in Princeton, and a faculty fellow held the service. His name was Brendan Scott, and during the service, Lyle got up and spoke for quite a long amount of time. He did a half-an-hour speech all about his parents, talking about how much he loved them, how much they meant to the boys. But Eric was just too upset to contribute, which understandably, if you've lost your parents and you're at their funeral, it's very difficult to get up and start talking about it. However, after all of this, the boys realised they no longer had their cruel, dictating, controlling, nasty father looming over their every single move. And the brothers were finally able to make their own choices in life. Lyle instantly became determined to start his own business. So he dropped out of university. I mean, he didn't want to be there in the first place, did he really? While Eric sort of jumped between continuing at UCLA and pursuing his career in tennis. So not much really changed for Eric, but Lyle was like, okay, this is it. I'm going to finally do what I've wanted to do all my life. So back to the case, like I said, the police were kind of doing their thing. They wanted to get on with it. And they obviously had seen the crime scene and they'd noticed that Kitty had been kneecapped. And this is usually something the mob would do. So they kind of started to think that maybe this was mob related. I mean, Jose knew a lot of people. He had sort of ties and connections with a whole bunch of people, and he wasn't a very liked person. A lot of people kind of weren't surprised. He was a bit of an ass, and they thought maybe he had it coming. But then the police obviously had noted how distraught the two boys were the night of the incident, but then they also noticed how their behaviour over the next few months began to change, and it hardly suggested that the boys were mourning the death of their parents. Everyone deals with grief differently, but living your best life, starting to spend money, pursuing your dreams straight after your parents had died is a little bit questionable. The boys now had a lot of money. Jose's personal life insurance obviously came to them, and the policy was $650,000 just for the life insurance policy. So that alone is a ridiculous amount of money. And the boys began to very, very quickly blow through a lot of this fortune. Understandably though, the boys chose not to go back and stay at the family home. I mean, I get it's your home, but if your family and your parents were murdered there, would you really want to be staying there? So the boys claimed that they feared for their own lives, so they chose to spend money and pay for hotels. But they chose to stay obviously in 5-star hotels, very expensive, prestigious hotels. They even hired bodyguards. They travelled around in limousines and had chauffeurs, and they chose to rent very expensive adjoining apartments in Marina del Rey. So I guess they could still be together, but be in a nice fancy ass place. And it said that Lyle treated himself to a Porsche. Now, apparently Lyle had asked his father for a Porsche, but obviously Jose was like, no, it's up to me what car you drive, you're not having a Porsche. So Lyle finally used his father's money and went and bought himself a Porsche. It was a Porsche 911 Carrera, and Eric went and bought himself a new Jeep Wrangler. And by October of that year, so only a few months after their parents' murder, they had charged over $90,000 to Jose's American Express card. $90,000 in a few months. Like, that's a lot of money. Like I said, Lyle wanted to start his own business, so, well, he did. Well, he tried to do. It didn't really work out, but it was called the Menendez Investment Enterprise, and he frequently flew between California and New Jersey, obviously only flying business class and first class and all the fancy classes that's going to cost even more money. But Lyle, he wasn't trained in business, like he didn't really know what he was doing, so the company just fell through before it had even started, really. So he then randomly bought himself a restaurant, which also ended up losing money because Lyle's not a businessman. He doesn't know what he's doing. Eric tried to sponsor a rock concert with a partner, but this partner apparently ran off with about $40,000. Again, so much money just gone. So Eric just put everything he could into his tennis, and he actually hired Mark Heffernan as a private coach, which sport private coaches are very expensive, and the boys began to travel extensively, and they weren't doing the whole budget travel, they were doing the expensive bougie traveling. And Eric pretty much listened to every single thing that Mark suggested to improve Eric's tennis game. So anything he said, so maybe we should try this really expensive physiotherapist or sports massage, Eric was just like, okay, money's not an issue, let's do it. And by the end of 1989, so the same year the parents were killed, two brothers had spent over $1 million. $1 million just gone. Wow. So this obviously was looking a little bit suspicious to the police. They were like, it's a bit weird that. So the police began to keep an eye out, sort of check out what they're doing, keep an eye on their behaviour, because it could just be a very weird coping mechanism. And going back to what I said earlier, can you remember when I said Eric was seeing a psychologist? Do you remember? Mr. Jerome Azil. Yeah, we remember him. Eric and Lyle were still seeing him. And on the 31st of October, 1989, Eric went and visited his doctor and he had some stuff to say. As we mentioned, Eric, even though he's gone around spending money and all that lot, he's not coping with the situation quite as well as Lyle was. He was acting a little bit more like a normal person would. And apparently something was eating away at Eric's mind. His conscience was being questioned. Maybe it was a guilty conscience and he wanted to get some things off his chest. So he booked an appointment and went and saw Mr. Jerome. And during this meeting, Eric turned to his doctor and said, "We did it. We killed our parents." Oh, bit of a shocker there. Okay, Eric, sit down, my child. Let's have a discussion. So that is actually where I'm going to leave today's episode. I'm so sorry if you haven't come across this case before. Apologies if this is a cliffhanger, but most people know this case. There is so much more to this case. There is so much more to the trial. There is a lot that's going to come out. If you want to know what happens next, or if you just want to hear me cover what happens next, please stay tuned for next week's episode. I am excited to carry on with this case. It's an intense one. It is very sad at the same time, so I'm sorry to have to do this to you guys, but that is the end of part 1. But thank you so much for joining me this week. If you are watching on YouTube's, if you're watching on YouTube, please give it a massive thumbs up. Leave me a comment down below and subscribe if you are not. However, if you are listening on podcast streaming services, thank you guys as well. Please rate, review and share and do whatever you can to help spread the word. And I will catch you in my next one and in part 2. I feel so guilty for doing this. I'll catch you next week. Bye!